Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another episode, and this time we go way back into the archives and touch on Rhapsody's first album, Legendary Tales. Before we do that, Chris Bud, how you doing?
I'm doing very good. I'm excited to talk about this. As you know, listening to this album took me down the Rhapsody rabbit hole this week, and so I am girded for battle at this point.
I'm looking at you. I see you've got your loincloth and your fuzzy boots and your broadsword. So we should be in for a good one. Before we get to that, though, anything else? Anything else you've been listening to this week that you enjoyed?
Yeah, just a couple of things worth mentioning. I haven't posted yet. I probably will by the time this episode airs, but I have a couple of new playlists to share with everybody, and there's some cool stuff. Some of the songs you've recommended throughout the weeks. Some of them are just stuff that's come out recently. I finally got a chance, I think I mentioned it last week, to listen to the new Powerwolf single, Beast of Gevaden, I believe, Gevadan, something to that effect. But they also released a video with Alyssa White Gluz from Arch Enemy, and they are doing a bonus disc on this new album that's coming out later this year, where different singers are going to be doing, basically just singing along to Powerwolf songs, kind of like karaoke style. And so she does a version of Demons Are a Girl's Best Friends, totally in death vocals. It's really pretty cool. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the other renditions. I know Christopher Bose from Ailstorm is doing a track, and Primal Fears, why am I forgetting his name?
Ralph Sheepers.
Yeah, Ralph Sheepers will be doing a track, amongst many others. So that's really kind of cool. And
yeah, I'll tell you this. You brought this to my attention this week. I had no idea they were doing this. I was a big Powerwolf fan when they first started, and I haven't listened to much of their newer stuff, but I definitely listened to this single with Alyssa, and it was fantastic. I loved it. I actually think that we should do an episode on them in the future, because I think that would be a lot of fun. They are just really big right now, and I think that with each album they seem to be getting more popular. So I'm kind of curious to see what this does for them.
Yeah, and it's just cool to hear these songs done in different vocal styles, or at least this is the only one I've heard so far, but it will be, I imagine, kind of cool. I think it's something other bands might want to consider doing, just because it's neat. There's also a Majestica, who was a big favorite of mine, formerly Rainseed. They released a 2-track single of 2 live tracks that they did in Tokyo, Above the Sky being the main track, which was their single from their debut album. And then they also did the Rainseed song, Welcome to the Theater. So if you want to hear some, because Rainseed never released any professionally recorded live material. So this would be the first time you get to hear it. Just pretty much exactly what you would expect, just power metal goodness. And you'll find that on one of the playlists, as well as Halloween released another single from their upcoming self-titled album, and the song is Fear of the Fallen. And this one was written by Andy Darris, whereas the previous single was written by Kai Hansen. And this is awesome. And I mentioned to you during the week that I used to think that Andy Darris was one of the weaker songwriters in Halloween when he first joined the band, but his songwriting has really, really gotten really good on with this song and some of the songs from the previous album as well. I was impressed. I honestly thought that this was a song that Wyke wrote, and I did a little research and found out that it was actually Andy. So cheers to Andy. Great use of all 3 vocalists. It's mostly sung by Kisk and Darris, but Kai makes his appearances as well. So I am so excited for that whole album to come out, and it's only another week or 2 away.
Yeah, I don't know that I've been this excited for an album maybe ever. I like this. This is so many decades in the making at this point. I am very much looking forward to it. But much like yourself, I went down the Rhapsody rabbit hole, and I really got caught up in a lot of that stuff this week. Obviously, because of the album that we were doing at your request. As a result, I listened to a bunch of other things that had nothing to do with power metal. So I just wanted to mention a few of them because I thought that they were kind of cool. The first album that I really kind of dug was an album by a band, for a French progressive rock band called Nine Skies. These guys have a bunch of albums out now, but their new one is called 520. Came out a couple of days ago, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe last month or so. Really, really cool stuff. A lot of acoustic guitars, kind of like a Porcupine Tree vibe on a number of tracks. And not only are there a bunch of guest appearances, such as Steve and John Hackett, but also one of my favorite vocalists makes an appearance, namely Damian Wilson, formerly of Threshold. So definitely a cool album and some really interesting tracks. A little slow in certain ways, but nonetheless a nice contrast to a lot of the Rhapsody stuff that I was listening to. So definitely worth checking out. I'll post a track or two during the week. Another band in a completely different genre, I guess we'll call it progressive black metal, a band called Code out of the UK. I think they're from London, actually. This band has a number of albums. I've never heard any of them, but I saw this album and it had gotten some impressive reviews, so I figured I would check it out. Really, really interesting stuff. An album that's kind of all over the place. Definitely black metal. Definitely some prog rock in there. Definitely some, post rock, I guess we'll call it. It's a little bit all over the place. From what I understand, their last album was definitely moving in that prog rock direction, and this was more of a return to form from their black metal roots. Really cool album, interesting, and definitely different from some of the stuff I usually listen to. So I enjoyed that one as well. That album, I think, came out a couple of days ago as well. And the third piece of music that I heard was a single from an upcoming EP by an artist called Onslow from Perth, Australia. It features Scott Kay of Voyager, and it was a really interesting track as well. The song is called Freddie Mercury. They released a music video for it just a couple of days ago. And it was just something different and music that was just not what I'm used to hearing from Scott. So if for the Voyager fans out there, definitely give this a listen. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, Scott is just such he's just such a great musician in so many different ways. Voyager's not his only band, clearly. And so if I see anybody's name from Voyager slapped on something else, you could bet your bottom dollar I'm going to check it out. And before we get to Rhapsody, I just wanted to mention there were two singles that got dropped today, and I'll just mention them quickly. Another single from Night Flight Orchestra called "Burn for Me," which also has an accompanying video, and nothing unusual from them, which means it's awesome. And a band that hasn't released anything in a while came out with a new single today, and that's the band Pain. They're kind of like a more on the industrial metal kind of side, and they released a new song called "Party in My Head," which is probably a little bit more poppier than, not as dark as some of their other older material, but they haven't released an album in quite some time. I think when they played at Prog Power a few years ago, their last album came out in 2016, and I think when they played at Prog Power, their previous album had just come out, and they haven't released anything since. And if you buy the single on iTunes, there's a cool B-side. They do a cover of the Rolling Stones' "Gimme Shelter." So I just wanted to mention those two also real quick. After a week of not really listening to much, I had a lot kind of come across my desk this week. So it's been kind of cool to listen to a ton of Rhapsody stuff, but also have some of this other different kind of stuff. Sounds like same with you.
Yeah, it was. It was a busy week for me in my personal life, but it was a nice kind of escape listening to some of this stuff. And I've mentioned this a bunch of times in the past. I try to really vary up what I'm listening to because I can't listen to just 37 power metal albums in a row at this point.
I can.
Although you can, although it seems like I did that with Rhapsody anyway. So for me, the contrast with some of these other styles was nice. And I'd be remiss if I guess I didn't mention the name of that Code album, which was called Fly Blown Prince. That's Fly Blown Prince. Again, that's the name of the album. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, so I wanted to mention that. I'll post a track or two just because. Just going back to it for a second, the closest comparison was Arcturus, I guess, but it was just really kind of out there stuff. But cool, very different. But let's get to the reason why we're here, which is obviously Rhapsody's debut album, Legendary Tales. You had given me the choice between this and Symphony of Enchanted Lands, their second album. So of course I listened to both, and then just about everything else for the first 5 or 7 years of their career. But I wanted to talk about the debut because it really talks, it really hits on the band's roots and how they got started and stuff like that. But before we get into the band, how did you first hear of Rhapsody?
I will never forget the first time I heard Rhapsody. I was at our friend Ralph's house, and his cousin Pat brought this album over, and I had just started listening to metal, and so he pops this on, and I hear this first minute and a half of this nothing I'd ever heard before, like this kind of Latin speaking with orchestral like medieval thing, and then all of a sudden the first main track, Warrior of Ice, comes on, and I to say that my mind was blown at that moment would be an understatement. It was just love at first note. I knew that this was a band that I was going to be a big fan of because to me they combined the fast power metal that Halloween perfected in the late 80s with this Hollywood soundtrack, symphonic, orchestral, and nobody was really doing. Not a lot of bands were doing this at the time. I think we mentioned the same thing when we were talking about Nightwish a few weeks back when Oceanborn was released right around the same time, I think a year later. But this kind of symphonic power metal that was kind of done like a medieval style. I think I want to say that this was kind of like a groundbreaking thing, and just mind blown. And my aunt and uncle got me the album for Christmas, I think, later that year, and I listened to the hell out of this album. From the second I had it, I was obsessed with it.
So let me ask this question, and this album obviously comes out, well, not obviously, but it comes out on October 27th of 1997. The lineup, and we'll just obviously get into it. Fabio Leone, obviously on lead vocals, Luca Turilli on guitars, Alex Staropoli on keyboards, and Daniela Carbonera on drums. Had you heard Fabio Leone's vocals on Labyrinth's No Limit, their debut album that had come out a year prior, or did you hear Rhapsody first?
You know what? It was so close together, I'm not sure. I remember, again, I believe Ralph played us the song Vertigo from No Limit. So it was either this or that. That was my first introduction to Fabio's vocals, and I had both of those albums early on in my fandom. So it was almost kind of surprising to me that it was the same guy, only because I feel like his vocal styles. Fabio is the master of so many different vocal styles. Even operatic vocals, which he didn't do a whole lot of in the early Rhapsody days, but you'll start to hear more of it later on. The dude is an unbelievable vocalist in so many ways. And the fact that he sounded like a different singer, and the fact that he had a different name in the booklet for the Labyrinth album under the stage name Joe Terry, which sounds like a wrestling jobber. He quickly became one of my favorite vocalists, and he still is to this day.
I'm happy you mentioned that. I was going to mention this towards the end, but it's, I think, just so poignant here. I actually had a long conversation with him about this after an Angra show a couple of years ago. I had the pleasure of speaking with Fabio for about a half an hour, and I asked him, is it a conscious decision on his part to really sound so different on all these discs? Obviously, the Rhapsody stuff the Labyrinth stuff that preceded it, but then you have him on Angra discs and a bunch of guest appearances on a number of different albums. And it was something that he really took great pride in because it's not by accident. It's just that he's able to do so many different variations of his signature sound that he's able to really sound like a different singer in many ways on a number of his projects. And he really took great pride in that. And actually, in his opinion, a lot of other singers, I think, were more of one-trick ponies to him. So he never understood why people didn't kind of diversify their sound. But that's not something he did. So I totally hear you. For me, I remember hearing Labyrinth first. So when I heard him on the Rhapsody discs, obviously I put two and two together, but I couldn't believe how different he sounded than he did on No Limits.
Yeah. And just to follow up on what you said about Fabio, I remember when he was announced to be going on tour with Camelot after in between Khan and Tommy Karavik as their vocalist. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what a weird matchup that is. And then when I saw him, I was like, it sounds like was made to be in Camelot. Like, and the same thing when I heard he was going to be in Angra, like that he just has a way.
You don't think it fits, but then he's like a chameleon. He blends right in.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. I've seen him sing for so many different bands and the fact he's got to be one of the most used like guest vocalist on so many albums. And it doesn't even matter if it's like a well-known band. Like he really seems to put himself out there for new and up and coming bands. And like Fabio's everywhere. I mean, he's been on an Arion album. I don't know if he's been on an Avantasia album. I don't think he has, but the dude is great. I know that there's definitely kind of like a love-hate thing, because I know there's a lot of people that don't really enjoy his vocals, but I've always been a big fan, and I think he's incredibly talented.
Yeah, the number of guest appearances is an episode in and unto itself. So I'll just say he's been on a lot of albums, and always an impressive performance, at least to these years. The irony is, I think that one of my least favorites is Rhapsody, although I'm coming around on that after all these years. But I remember when I first heard Legendary Tales after having heard him on No Limits, I loved it. I thought the vocals were good. I never thought that they were outstanding. I've done a 180 on that. I think he's a phenomenal vocalist, but I remember that being one of the first big differences with the Rhapsody sound. But also, you mentioned this earlier, nobody, and I mean nobody, was doing this in 1997. And now you've got a lot of bands that have kind of copied this style, not quite to the success or with the same flavor that Rhapsody does, many imitators, but at the same time, this was so different. And the intro track, Irritenax, really just, I mean, from the moment it starts, you know that this is something new and different, and you don't know if you're going to like it or not, or at least not until Warrior of Ice kicks in, but you know that you're in for something really, really different.
Yeah, it's even to this day, when I hear that intro go into Warrior of Ice, where it just kind of quiets down just for a sec, and then Fabio just comes in, and it's like, oh my God, that song just kicks my ass every single time I listen to it. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the live experience, but when I heard that song performed live for the first time, I lost my mind. It was such a bucket list song to hear performed live. It wasn't even Fabio singing, but it was just that song is just it's such a huge song for me in my like fandom of metal. And like, this was really what made me such a huge fan of symphonic power metal and orchestral metal. This was just, that song was just my introduction to it. And I mean, the guitars are blazing and the bass lines are thumping, and Fabio is just singing his heart out. And it's just like, oh my God. And the thing that I was really really impressed with after going back and listening to this, and it's been, what, almost 25 years now. Next year it'll be 25 years. That's unbelievable. It sounds, the production is so crisp and so clear, and of course I go and look at the credits, and sure enough, Sasha Paith and Miro are the producers. It just goes to show you how strong of a producer Sasha was even 25 years ago. I mean, it's just, to me, like, I can't believe an album from 1997 sounds this sonically good.
Yeah, you don't need to remaster this, right? Like, this sounds about as perfect as an album is going to sound, especially given what's on this disc, because you have I mean, you have all these different sounds with obviously the classical violins and the viola and the cello, and then of course the as they call it, the Choir of Immortals, which was something I knew about and obviously heard on the disc. I didn't realize who actually was in that group. I'll touch upon this for a second. It actually has a couple of other vocalists whom I really enjoy, not least of which is Thomas Rhapsody. Thomas Rhapsody is a German singer, most notably known for his work with Heaven's Gate back in the late 80s and 90s. Really, kind of a not a very well known singer, but a singer who I just loved. Their album in 1991, "Living in Hysteria," I kind of bought blind on eBay, probably in the late 90s, and I still really enjoy that disc as a power metal disc. Later on, he would go and join Red Key, who came out with an album in 2006, also in that a little bit less power metal, a little more just heavy metal, if you will. But I didn't realize that he was in this group of, this all-star backing vocalists that were on the album. You can't really tell that he's on there, but when I read it, I was surprised.
And when in Heaven's Gate, you mean the band, not the cult, right?
Yeah, 1,000%. We've got enough cults running around these days, but that's a story for another podcast.
Just wanted to make sure. The other thing too is that, like, Rhapsody would go on to have like these massive productions, as far as having like an entire orchestra and tons of musicians, and this is actually, if you listen to this album, you'd be surprised at how few people were actually involved, musician wise, in putting this together, because it sounds very full, considering that it's just a handful of folks, and a choir of about 8 or 9 people. In the future they would have like an entire massive choir and an entire orchestra, I guess, when there was more money coming in. But I mean, this album sounds pretty incredible considering the limited staff that was involved.
Yeah, no question about it. And you have this blistering, the Warrior of Ice, this blistering opening track, and then it goes into one of the more unique songs on the album, but an absolute classic in Rage of the Winter.
Yeah, I mean, just brace yourself, because this is just going to be me like salivating over every single song. But yeah, this is another one. It starts out kind of, you don't know that like what's coming. It seems like it's going to be maybe a little bit mellower, and then it just the chorus is just just hits you. Oh my God, I almost started singing, but nobody wants to hear that.
Well, I've been singing it all week, so I'm totally with you. Really an iconic track. And what, I mean, you talk about a 1-2 punch to start an album. You by this point, you can tell what Rhapsody is all about, or at least you think you do, because then we get into Forest of Unicorns, which is a completely different experience altogether.
Yeah, this is, I mean, this might be where Rhapsody might have lost a few people.
Myself included. I'm going to be honest with you. When I'll cut you off and I'll just say it. I love this band, and I've been listening to this band for a long time. But it was tracks like Forest of Unicorns where I really questioned as to, was I enjoying this, or was I just like, is this an extension of me wanting to play some sort of an RPG video game, or what is going on here? Because it just sounds like a bunch of elves and fairies literally running around the forest, and you have the harpsichord and the flute, and it's, how do you explain it? It's like it's like the first ballad on the disc, but it's not really a ballad. It's more of like a folksy waltz. I don't even know how you describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they did a better job in future albums doing a song in this style, like Village of Dwarves from Dawn of Victory and March of the Swordmaster from Power of the Dragon Flame, where it kind of takes that kind of like whimsical, folky kind of sound, but it makes it a little bit more accessible and a little catchier. I mean, this is a little bit, even for me, on the cheesy side.
Yeah,
and I think I've
that's
always
well
thought
said.
I've always thought that it's probably the only song on the entire album that I don't think is great. But it's also, keep in mind that this is the first part of many chapters of a story. So, you can't really expect every song to just be like this slapping, like, just, crazy power metal song. So, I mean, this actually makes for a pretty good segue between Rage of the Winter and then the song that would follow, Flames of Revenge, which is another like fast-paced, power metal anthem that I remember when we saw Luca Turilli's Rhapsody at Prague Power. I think I was about to, like, because we were sponsors and we were in front of the rail, and I think it was a long show. They played for over 2 hours, and I think I was like, I need to find a spot where I could go use the bathroom, and I was just about to walk away, and they hit that opening riff to the song, and I ran right back to my spot. I was like, oh, there's no way in hell I'm missing them play Flames of Revenge, because another just sick like power metal slapping, just ass whipping song. It's just fantastic.
And to your point, this is a deeper cut, right? I don't think anybody expected them to actually whip this out when Luca played live. That show was easily 2 hours. It may have been pushing 2.5 hours. But even then, I was surprised that they touched Flames of Revenge, because I don't know that they've ever played that live, or at least not to my knowledge. I'm sure they.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it was. Oh man, what a great song! Like I kind of consider, Warrior of Ice, Flames of Revenge, and Land of Immortals as kind of like the big three, just like anthemic, speedy power, like symphonic power metal songs. I mean, there's lots of them on this album, but those three really, I think, stuck out to me when I was a kid, and to this day are still, I would argue, the three strongest tracks on the album, along with Rage of the Winter, I would say. But these three are just nonstop, it's just, I don't even know how to verbalize how awesome this is. So just go listen to it.
Yeah, I'll say this. We'll get into it. Virgin Skies, the sixth track, is really just an intro to Land of Immortals, and I think you definitely would agree with me there. For me, and I'll just put it out there, Land of Immortals, by the time you get to that track, that is my track of the week, hands down. I love that song, and I would put it up there with any power metal song ever written. As good as Warrior of Ice is, and it is great, and as good as some of these other tunes are, Land of Immortals was when they hit this album out of the park for me.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree at all. It's to me, it's one of the greatest, not just one of the greatest Rhapsody songs of all time, but it's one of my favorite metal songs ever. It's just that good. This, I think, has always been a staple of their live show, no matter which version of Rhapsody you see. Just like, and we haven't really mentioned the Luca Turilli, Alex Staropoli, just the way that they play against one another because compare it to like Halloween, where you have two guitar players that are kind of dueling. This is different because you have a guitar player and a keyboard player, which creates this whole different dynamic. And they're just a force. Like, these are two guys that are just absolute masters of their instruments, not to mention the guys that are composing all of the music, on this album. The two of them together were an absolute force.
Yeah, the songwriting and the compositions here are second to none. And if you look, just with revisionist history for almost 25 years, just the amount of epic songs, albums, and EPs that both of them have done in their own right is just downright scary. Just the amount of quality music that they put out, it's incredible.
Yeah, I remember when Symphony of Enchanted Lands was released, and I bought the limited edition box set. It was fascinating because there was this very detailed booklet that it came with, and it each band members, what their favorite albums and the artists that inspire them. And it was so interesting to me to see how they were like, all the stuff that they love was the same stuff I loved, but throw in that John Williams, Danny Elfman, fandom of Hollywood soundtracks, and they just masterfully combined, power metal with Hollywood soundtracks with like medieval sounding instruments, like the Baroque recorder, which Alex's brother Manuel plays on a lot of the Rhapsody albums. It was just such a recipe for success, I think, and something that really, like, no one had done. So they were breaking new ground, and like you said before, lots of copiers or I guess imitation's the sincerest form of flattery. Because there's lots of bands that do this type of music very, very well, but Rhapsody was to me, they were the first.
The first and probably still the best. Not that there aren't others that are very good, but I still think that they're probably the best at what they do. And like you said, the first.
And now there's two of them, so yeah. Who's going to compete with that?
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting because when you get after Land of Immortals, they go into Echoes of Tragedy, which to me is like what I want their ballads to sound like. Not quite as off the wall as Forest of Unicorns. And really, I think Echoes of Tragedy kind of sets the table for all their ballads on future albums. So I think that they were experimenting a bit and obviously, kind of going along with the story. But the lyrics, listen, the reality is this: with Rhapsody, the lyrics are not what got me into the band. If anything, it detracted a little bit for me just in general because I couldn't relate to any of this stuff. But something, I should have known what I was in for when I looked at the cover of the album, because if you look at the cover of the album, you see a dragon on the far left going to battle with a guy on a horse and a sword, and like that classic.
That's not a horse. That's a unicorn.
Oh yes. You're absolutely correct, and that would obviously make sense. And then Legendary Tales is obviously in that like Dungeons and Dragons font, so I should have known what I was in for. That it wasn't going to be quite as introspective as Fate's Warning or a Wolverine. But listen, lyrics aside, obviously this was groundbreaking stuff and stuff I can still enjoy, and probably enjoyed it more now than I did even about 10 years ago, because I think I had just kind of played it so much that I got sick of it after a while.
Yeah, I that's kind of what I think is the funny thing about this band, is that there were probably so many, dudes that were all like, oh, like, this is so cheesy, this like lyric, these lyrics are so cheesy. And these are like the same dudes that were 45 years old and still playing Dungeons and Dragons and Final Fantasy. So, sorry that your metal isn't cool enough, but as somebody who's a big fan of RPGs at that time, like the lyrical content, I was like, yeah, it's cheesy, but it's fun. Like, if you're into that kind of thing, like, I don't know, one of the things I definitely thought about while listening to Rhapsody this week is that it makes me just want to play video games. There's like this kind of, I don't know if they really even considered that when they were making this music, but then again, some of the great, video game soundtracks have borrowed a lot from the great Hollywood soundtracks. So I guess there'd be a connection there. But I also remember listening to these, especially the first two Rhapsody albums, while playing, Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Final Fantasy VII and games around that time. So to me, I don't know, Rhapsody kind of goes hand in hand with gaming to me. So and obviously the themes thematically, I mean, obviously, dragons and unicorns and things of that nature. I mean, might as well be a Dragon Quest game, of course.
It's not even just the games, although that's obviously a part of it for me. But I can't help but think of the Lord of the Rings movies, which had obviously started coming out in 2001 and would come out for the next 3 years. The trilogy. When I hear this music, I really thought of it as like going hand in hand with those movies that would come out just a couple of years later and probably were in pre-production around this time just because of the massive undertaking those films were. It goes hand in hand, and quite frankly, they could have done the soundtrack just because of the nature of the the songwriting and the orchestration and whatnot.
Yeah. So getting back to Echoes of Tragedy, though, like I think this is such a well done song with the choruses, and when I was listening to it, it almost kind of gave me kind of a Manowar, like that over dramatic ballad kind of thing that Manowar would do in a way, more so like the chorus than the verses, but
yeah, no, it has that epic feel to it, and it's interesting because they would go on to work with Joey DeMaio later in their career.
Yeah, so I enjoy this. I think it's a short track, and I think you got to play it loud, like not to sound like Joey DeMaio, but like it's just such a like sonically impressive song with the musicianship and the singing and everything. I wouldn't put Forest of Unicorns in the ballad. I don't think it's a ballad. It's like you said, it's kind of like this jaunty folk tune. I feel like this Echoes of Tragedy is really the one actual ballad that's on this album, and I think it's really well done. And I think their best ballad would come on their next album with Wings of Destiny. Personally, it's my favorite Rhapsody ballad of all time, but this is really good too, and it leads into Lord of the Thunder, which is you know what? Take it away.
I have been singing this song all day, and I'm not even kidding you. I find myself singing it to myself over and over, and I don't even know the words, so I'm really just singing the notes because I don't even know the words. This is a extremely speedy, extremely catchy, and one of the best choruses on the album. Not lyrically, just in terms of the way that it just sticks with you. It's a very much an underrated track because nobody ever talks about it, but Lord of the Thunder, please be my guide, because it's fantastic.
Yeah, the chorus again, like you said, it was stuck in my head this week too, and again, like another showcase of during the solos of Luca and Alex just going back and forth and showing their chops. But this song is also just another like power metal force. It's really, really good stuff, and they cap it off with. It's kind of interesting that this album is chock full of these like really like just slapping power metal songs, and then they finish off with this kind of, it's the longest song on the album. It's very folky. It's not, I don't know if I'd call it a ballad so much as it is just kind of a mid-tempo kind of almost Renaissance fair kind of tune, which I'd be honest with you, like I always thought that this song was kind of disappointing, that you're finishing this album full of like these ass-kicking songs with kind of like this Renaissance fair kind of like mid-tempo tune. But after years and years of listening to it more and more, I love this song. I think it's so good. It's so Rhapsody. Like, as much as Rhapsody is all about like fast power metal and blazing solos, I mean, this is also what Rhapsody is all about. And I think whereas Forest of Unicorns might have missed the mark a little bit on the folkiness in terms of being maybe a little too corny, I feel like this is perfect for what it is, and a great way to end the album. Great chorus like portions. I never put two and two together until this week when I was listening to it. But I'll say it again. I just heard Renaissance Fair while I was listening to this. So
Yeah, it's funny. When I was listening to the closing track, the title track, first of all, there are portions of that song that remind me of Angel's Cry Angra. In other words, not the song, but just the album and the feel of certain parts of that album. I feel like you could have taken certain parts of the song and put it on Angel's Cry, and you probably wouldn't have known the difference, although it certainly is part of Rhapsody's signature sound. I'll also say that I kept thinking to myself, this should not have been the closing track. They should have added one more track and closed it with something else. Not necessarily fast. It just felt, it kept me wanting to hear just one more epic track to end it. I felt like this missed the mark a little bit. I can't put my finger on it. I like the track. I just wanted something else to end the disc, and I thought it was slightly anticlimactic.
Yeah, and that was definitely my opinion of it at one point in time. But now it's kind of like, I think it's because the album is so front loaded too, because you have like Warrior of Ice and Rage of the Winter and Flames of Revenge and Land of Immortals, and all those are all like, other than a couple of short tunes in between, like every song is that song. So I guess it was kind of like a creative choice to maybe they wanted you wanting more at the end, like, because obviously the next album would continue on with the story, and they would also have this even longer epic last track on that album. But I think maybe why you felt that way is because it's not a very long album in general. It's a 45-minute album, and boy, they crammed a lot into 45 minutes. At least,
and it doesn't feel like 45 minutes. It feels like 25 minutes when you're listening to it. It really does move well, and I've always thought about that about them. And I want to talk about the rating and kind of where this fits in terms of how much you like some of these other albums better. We won't go into a deep dive, but I haven't heard. What is your track of the week?
Well, I mean, you had mentioned to me that you think we're going to have the same track of the week, and I completely understand why you would say that. But just to be different, because the two songs are neck and neck for me anyway, I'm going to go with Warrior of Ice, just because just what it elicits in my mind is the beginning of this love affair with this style of music for me, and I can still go back to it, and it's still, I've probably listened to it 100 times, and it still sounds fresh to me, and I'll always think of like being a teenager in my basement and acting out the song while Mike is doing, like, flips on the floor, and Brian's playing, Nintendo 64 wrestling games, and like,
it definitely brings you back to our childhood for sure.
Yeah, and that's
a nostalgic bit.
It's just that song. I mean, Land, I don't know if I had to pick between that and Land of Immortals, I'm not sure I could. I think they're both amazing songs. But I guess since you already chose one, I'll choose the other.
All right. So if you're being obstinate, you want to be different. But no, I knew it was going to be one of the two. I thought I had a 50-50 shot, but I certainly respect that. And I know why Warrior of Ice kind of holds a place for you. What would you say in terms of where this fits in? Because I know we both went back and listened to the follow-up 4 or 5 albums and the couple of EPs in there as well. As good, better, not as good? Where does this fall for you?
Well, I ended up listening to pretty much everything they released under the name Rhapsody before they had to change to Rhapsody of Fire. So that pretty much included the entire saga, the entire Emerald Sword saga, which begins with this album, and then the Symphony of Enchanted Lands Part Two album, and then whatever EPs kind of fell during that time as well. And to me, the first three albums are, I would put them up against any band's like three albums in a row. Like we talk about a lot about like the three album punch, and like I think of Gamma Ray with Land of the Free and Somewhere Out in Space and Power Plant, or Halloween with Master of the Rings, Time of the Oath, and Better Than Raw. Just around that time, like bands were just like churning out these incredible albums, and we had a little chat, or a little back and forth on Facebook earlier with our friend Mike Johnson, and talking about how like the mid '90s through the mid 2000s was just such a like hotbed of just amazing power metal. And so to me, like this, followed by Symphony of Enchanted Lands, followed by Dawn of Victory, those three albums are just so phenomenal. I think that Power of the Dragon Flame, while it's a lot better than I remember it, I think it falls a little bit short of these three albums. But I mean, these first three albums for me, I feel like depending on the day, any one of them could be my favorite. I think Dawn of Victory, I have that one, kind of takes me back to my freshman year of college. So I have a lot of fond memories of getting that, and Halloween's Dark Ride album right around the same time. So I have a lot of fond memories, but I also have a lot of fond memories about getting Symphony of Enchanted Lands as well. And it's so hard for me to really say which one I think is the best of those three. But I mean, I would put those three up against any band's, three best consecutive albums. I think it's just three masterpieces.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know that I would have gone back and listened to any of this stuff anytime soon had you not picked this album, but I did, and it really just echoed a couple of things for me. This is a very good debut album and a groundbreaking debut album, but I think it actually pales in comparison to the next two albums. I think that Symphony of Enchanted Lands is their best album, and followed closely by Dawn of Victory, just in terms of the overall quality from beginning to end. There's a little bit of dead spots, in my opinion, on this album, as good as it is, and as groundbreaking as it is. And then from there, it kind of peters out a little bit. And as much as I enjoy it, I would put them below the first three for sure. But it was nice to kind of take the ride and go back into this stuff. I am very lucky, and I know you're not going to want to hear this, but I had the pleasure of seeing this lineup live in 2006, I believe, when I saw them open for Manowar. What an incredible show that was. It was a sold out show at a club here in New York City. And I remember being online and having people come up to me offering me 3 times face value for the ticket just so that they could go in and see Rhapsody. And I wouldn't give up the ticket. I'm sure I could have used the money when I was in my 20s, but I didn't. And I went and saw this show, and I was just blown away at how good and how tight they were as a live band. And ultimately, they would release an album called Live in Canada, The Dark Secret, in 2006, based on this 2005 tour, if you will, where they basically played 10 or 11 songs opening for Manowar. It was just such a fun show. And I look forward to being able to see, the Luca Turilli / Fabio Leone connection again next year in Atlanta.
Yeah, I would recommend their DVD as well, because those recordings were done around that same time. I believe it was released right around the same time as that live album, and that is called. I had it up. Visions from the Enchanted Lands. And so there's a lot of cool behind the scenes stuff, but also live tracks sprinkled in. So I think I got this on like one of those like Black Friday sales where I just bought like a ton of metal DVDs that I was missing, and this is one of my favorite. I have a ton of metal DVDs, as you know, and this is one of my favorite ones. There's so much good stuff on here.
I've never seen it. I got to go on your Plex server and listen to it. As an aside, I've never seen it.
Oh, I definitely recommend it. It's just, I don't know, like, this is the kind of music that just puts me in a good mood. I'm sure you feel the same way, and so to hear it in front of, crowds of people, and I think a lot of the clips are from both that show in Canada, but also some from Germany and the Czech Republic, and it's got a whole bunch of cool stuff on there. So definitely recommend. I don't know, it's probably out of print. I don't know for sure, but if you can find it somewhere, I definitely recommend checking it out. I'm sure there's like individual songs on YouTube, but I recommend that highly. My first live experience of Rhapsody was seeing Luca Turilli's Rhapsody at Prague Power. I'm fairly certain I saw that before I saw Rhapsody of Fire, but it was probably right around the same time, and it was interesting getting to see the two bands, like, after Rhapsody had kind of split up into these two bands. And so, you'd have with Luca Turilli's Rhapsody, it would be Luca Turilli, and then he would bring with him Dominic and the other guy whose name is French that I'm not forgetting, Patrice. He would bring them along with him, and then Fabio would stay with Alex Staropoli in Rhapsody of Fire, and so you had like these two Rhapsodies, and they were releasing really strong material at the same time, which was really, really cool. But getting to see Luca Turilli's Rhapsody with Alessandro from Trick or Treat, who became Luca's vocalist, and he's now the singer for Twilight Force. He did a phenomenal job. I mean, Fabio Leone in Rhapsody's shoes are not easy to fill. I thought Alessandro did a fantastic job, and they actually had Mikko Harkin, former keyboardist for Sonata Arctica. He was their touring keyboard player. That show was unbelievable. If I recall, that it was a 2-hour and 15-minute set. They played stuff from the Luca Turilli Rhapsody debut album, stuff from Luca Turilli's solo project, stuff from the old Rhapsody albums. The set list was incredible. The crowd was insane with the inflatable swords. Arguably one of the most fun times I've ever had watching a band play. There were portions of it where I watched it with you in front of the rail. There were portions of it where I ran back into the crowd so I could watch it with my friends who weren't sponsoring. I mean, I just had so much fun watching that set, and then seeing Rhapsody of Fire in a completely different type of scenario where they were just doing a tour, and they were playing at, I believe it was Gramercy in New York City, and Voyager. I mean, the main reason I went was to see Voyager. They were opening. They only played for like a half hour, and I lost my mind for them. But I also got to see, I believe it was the first time I got to see Fabio Leone sing live, and totally different atmosphere, like crazy crowd surfers and moshes, and I was right up front because I was like right on on the stage for Voyager's set. But boy, like they both Rhapsodies put on one hell of a show, and I got to see Rhapsody or Luca Turilli's Rhapsody again with you, opened for Primal Fear in New York City years later, and they had a shorter set, but just as enjoyable. And like you said, I am so excited, especially after this week, to see this new version of Rhapsody, which is almost it's basically the Rhapsody 25th anniversary or 20th anniversary band, kind of coming together to start a full-time band. And it's Alex Holsworth on drums joining Fabio, Luca, Dominique, and Patrice. And I am so excited to see that version of Rhapsody. It'll be my first time seeing Luca and Fabio together, which is exciting. And I'm sponsoring, so that makes it all the more exciting. But oh man, I've been clamoring to see Rhapsody headline Prague Power. I guess I technically have, based with the Luca Turilli's Rhapsody, but this, other version of Rhapsody, whatever. There's a million Rhapsodies. They're all wonderful. But yeah, this is a joy for me to go back and listen to these albums again. Man, this band was such a huge part of my development of as a metal fan. Just set the stage for so many other bands, and another part of the reason why I gravitated more towards power metal than prog metal, because it just, the hooks and the just all of it just sucked me in. And when you think about just going back to that song Warrior of Ice, how I didn't even have to hear the whole song. I was sold on. This album was purchased by me within a minute and a half of listening to it, and I never even heard of the band. Didn't even know the band existed until that moment. I mean, I can't remember a time where something just spoke to me that quickly.
Well, I think it was a great choice. And I'll just leave you with two thoughts before we rate the album. Number one, this band has to play live with a full orchestra. I think of bands like Within Temptation and the Scorpions and Dream Theater. They've all done the orchestra thing.
Metallica,
yeah. I mean, I was at the S&M show in New York City 20 years ago. The fact that Rhapsody hasn't done the full orchestration thing is something that needs to change. And you mentioned Luca Turilli's solo album, King of the Nordic Twilight, maybe the best Luca Turilli project ever. And that's including the Rhapsody stuff. That's how high I hold that album in such high esteem.
Oh my God. That's
another episode for another day.
Another rabbit hole. Yeah. I mean, I had to stop myself from diving into that. I mean, Luca only did a handful of solo albums before he would, end up starting Luca Turilli's Rhapsody. But that first one is, yeah, I put that right up there with any of these first three Rhapsody albums. That is the fact that he was able to make an album that good, and then there'd still be enough material for them to come out with Dawn of Victory. I mean, it just
Nothing
goes
short of incredible.
Yeah, I mean, the dude is just a epic songwriter, and not take nothing away from Alex Starpoli. I think that the force of them together. I'm not sure that either Rhapsody nowadays is ever going to be as strong as far as songwriting is concerned with the two guys apart. And I think that based on the Rhapsody of Fire's most recent single, it seems like they're kind of, and maybe this is just a one-off, but it seems like they're kind of stepping away from the Renaissance fair, that kind of that style of what's the word I used earlier? Just old timey. What do you call it? Just that kind of style. It sounds like they're going in a more maybe modern direction with their new singer Giacomo Voli. So I'm interested to see what the next full length album sounds like. For Rhapsody of Fire. But, like I said, the two of these guys together, it kind of harkens back to Kai and Wyke, the songwriting, dynamo in the early days of Halloween, where you just had these two beasts of songwriters who also happen to be the guys who are playing the guitars. Whereas in this case, it would be Luca and Alex playing guitars and keyboards, but basically same difference. It was magic, and they came out guns a-blazing with this album, Legendary Tales, for sure.
Well said. Scale of 1 to 10, what do you rate this disc?
For me, this is a 9.25, I would say. It's not perfect because it's a little bit short, I think, and like you said, it does kind of leave you wanting more, and it's close to it's. Oh man, I'm gonna go with my first instinct and just say 9.25. I think that's where it goes for me.
I'll say this: I'm giving it an 8.5. I think that it's the great stuff is phenomenal, and it's if you want to talk about impact, it's a 15 out of 10, right? I mean, it's in terms of its impact on just power metal and the metal scene in general. But it's not without its flaws, and I think that subsequent albums are better. And in that rarefied 9 air. So I ding it a little bit for that. And through no fault of its own, again, the lyrics take a little something away from me, just because you have to kind of be in the mood for it. But certainly a very enjoyable listen, and its mark on the industry is second to none. So with that, we have Legendary Tales by Rhapsody, and I think it's actually my turn to pick something for next week.
And is it Symphony of Enchanted Lands?
It's unfortunately it is not. You're going to have to wait for that. But I want to do something a little bit different next week. Not different in terms of black metal, although I promise you we will get there, and we will get there soon. But I wanted to tell you a little story, and I'll explain why I picked a particular album.
Grandfather, tell me a story.
Exactly, and no, it's not Manowar either. I want to go back to 70,000 Tons of Metal for a second. I was on this cruise, and there was one day where it was a beautiful day in the middle of the Caribbean, and I go up to the pool deck, and it's probably late morning, early afternoon, and there's this band that's playing on stage that I had never heard of in my life. And I didn't get to see their whole set. I was only there for about 10 or 15 minutes because I had other obligations. But when I see this band playing, I see a orchestra, very similar to what I was talking about with Rhapsody, but a small orchestra behind this band with flutes and acoustic guitars and obviously the band themselves with their electric guitars and female backing vocals. And I just had no idea what the hell this was. But I said to myself, this is really cool. I enjoyed what I heard, and I had never heard a note from this band before. So I did a little homework when I got home. I found out that this band had 4 albums that had basically come out I guess it's like the late 90s, early 2000s, and a couple of albums into the 2000s. And then they really haven't done very much at all since, but they've played a ton of festivals around the world, and they continue to play live. And I'm pretty sure that it's a band that you've never heard of, and it's a band called Haggard. Are you familiar with them at all?
I am, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Yeah, surprise. Thanks to my friend Caleb, who, when I first became friends with him, he was telling me about some of the bands. He would literally go through my entire iTunes and be like, okay, you're going to need this, and you're going to need this. And one of the bands he told me to check out was Haggard. And
that is hysterical.
So I actually have 4 albums by them.
You have all of them.
Oh, well then there you go. So I am ready for whichever album you choose. To be honest with you, I've listened to a track here, a track there. I have an idea of what they're about, but this would definitely be a very new experience, like listening to one of their albums, several times and really, really ingest it.
Well, that is exactly why I wanted to do it, because even though I had every intention of going back and listening to them when I got home from the cruise, life got in the way and other things got in the way, and I never gave them their due listen. In fact, I've never actually heard a note of theirs outside of that ship. So I did a little research. A lot of people are saying that Awaking the Centuries is their best disc. It was recorded on released in February of 2000. And that's what we're going to listen to this week. We're going to talk about something that you and I have literally never heard, and we'll see what our impressions are after a week of listening to Awaking the Centuries.
I think this is such a cool choice, just because I think it's something that I remember enjoying the little bit that I heard. And then for whatever reason, just never went back in and tried to. As a matter of fact, based on my iTunes listening, tracking or whatever, I mean, it doesn't even look like I ever actually sat down and listened to any of these 4 albums start to finish. Just looks like random songs here and there. So, I mean, this might as well be brand new.
Well, then I had a feeling you weren't going to be very familiar at a minimum. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to listen to this next week, and we'll come back to you with some Haggard from 2000. And thanks, everyone, for submitting requests. We have a bunch of new material that we're going to cover in the coming months. And we hope you enjoyed the week's show, and we'll be back next week with something completely different.
Yep, and then the week after that, I'm probably going to choose Symphony of Enchanted Lands.
And we go back to Rhapsody. Have a great week. I hope I'm sure you enjoyed this week, and hopefully you enjoy Haggard just the same. I'll talk to you during the week, bud.
All right, take care.